So this is the first in a series here that we're going to do on hydrotherapy, looking at the theory and practice of various forms of hydrotherapy. So first of all, as we begin, just a reminder that as you navigate any health challenge, it's always recommended that you partner with the medical practitioner that shares your philosophy of care of the human body, both in disease and in health. And the things we talk about here are just tools in a toolbox that you can use to help return to wellness if you're sick and keep well if you're not sick. Been used successfully by others and others in similar situations, but always investigate any treatment protocol for yourself before just taking it on without doing your own due diligence. Thomas Edison said that the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his patient in the care of the human frame, diet, and the cause and prevention of disease. Very forward-thinking thought for his day and age. Another very forward-thinking thought that is still relevant today was stated back in 1885. There are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there is only one way that heaven approves. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. Pure air and water, cleanliness, a proper diet, purity of life, and a firm trust in God are remedies for which the want of thousands are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that the people do not appreciate. Fresh air, exercise, pure water, and clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all, with but little expense. But drugs are expensive, both in the outlay of means and the effect produced upon the system. So we're going to be focusing on the water portion of this statement here, as well as cleanliness and other things that help to purify the life, including a sweet premises, which is clean. In 3 John 1 verse 2 says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers." So we take care of our soul and follow what God asks us to do. It'll also spill over into our physical being and health as well. In Romans 12, 1 and 2, "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God." So just some reminders about the underlying basis for what we do and what we're learning. So hydrotherapy, you probably know that the term hydro means water. We have hydroelectric dams, which is water from electricity, or electricity from water rather, just the movement of water from its point of position, from a higher point to a lower point, and moving the turbines. So water is what hydro refers to. Therapy is some form of treatment modality for a symptom or a syndrome. So water treatments is another term that is used for hydrotherapy. In Leviticus 17:11, it states that for the life of the flesh is in the blood. So that's where the life-giving component of our body comes from, is from our blood. If we have healthy blood, we have a healthy body. The Spirit of Prophecies talks a lot about building healthy blood, the things that make poor blood from a dietary perspective. And it's a very key component of maintaining health is having good, healthy blood. So most of the action that hydrotherapy has in a positive way is directly connected to the improvement and the changing of blood flow characteristics in the body. So disease states set in and become exacerbated when blood tends to pool around areas of infection or disease. So we can change that by putting in the hydrotherapy to allow it to change directions and move more quickly or slowly through the body. So heat is a vasodilator by activity, and cold is a vasoconstrictor. So vasodilation opens blood vessels, vasoconstriction closes them. So you can actually create your own pump by vasodilating, vasoconstricting. In fact, that's what exercise does. As your body attempts to offload heat, you vasodilate at the surface of the skin. The blood comes more clearly to the surface of the skin. It flushes the skin. It becomes red as the heat is radiated off the body. So exercise, whether it's walking or running or biking, whatever it is, it has a heat dumping effect by vasodilating the skin. So it's just very therapeutic. It's one of the benefits of exercise. Vasoconstriction happens typically with cold. So if you were exercising and then jumped into a cold pool, that would be a quench, for example. It would drive the blood away from the surface of the skin back to the core. And then if you warm up again, it would then bring that back around. So that would increase the movement action of the blood. And to have that happening equally and evenly throughout the entire body helps tend the body towards a state of health. So the heart is a fluid pump. So the fluid is the blood, and the blood is the life of the body, as we spoke about earlier. The blood carries nutrients to the tissues and waste from them. So it's a vital link in maintaining the life of the human body. So having complete circulation to all aspects of the body is critical. And we see circulatory issues showing up, atherosclerotic kinds of things, or neuropathies, reduced blood flow occurring. So if you have reduced blood flow, you have reduced circulations, you have reduced movement of wastes away and nutrients and oxygen too. So one of the roles of hydrotherapy is that it's one of the most powerful non-poisonous means of quickly moving blood from one point to another. And so hydrotherapy can do that. And in addition to the heart doing its pumping action, it can increase the evenness of the circulatory system. So for example, a contrast shower on a daily basis is a good way to kind of get that blood flowing through the body. You can do that on morning and evening if you wish, or more often through the day. But doing a cycle of more than 3 at a time is not recommended. Take a break in between. So the key blood components that are affected by hydrotherapy, number one are the red blood cells. So they're the oxygen carrying capacity members, as well as the CO2 farriers. They ferry CO2, carbon dioxide, away from the tissues and release them into the lungs, and that is released through exhalation. So the red blood cell both carries carbon dioxide and oxygen. And then the other major component of the white blood cells, and that's the foundation of the immune system. In a healthy person, there's about 7,000 to 9,000 white blood cells per drop. If you do a fraction of a blood draw and someone who is sick, you'll see a much thicker band of white. That's where they get the name white blood cells or leukocytes. You have your plasma as kind of a straw-colored liquid, and your red blood cells are going to be the heaviest, and they're going to centrifuge out to the bottom. But in someone who's sick, you're going to have about 15,000 to 25,000 white blood cells per drop, and that essentially indicates an infection of some nature. To get more in detail on the blood analysis, then you would go in and look at the predominant leukocyte or white blood cell type that would be present, and that could give you an indication of what type of an infection you might be looking at, because there are eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, and those different ones have a higher density based on what type of infection is. If it's a bacterial infection or a parasitic infection, etc., you'll have a higher ratio of one type or another. So some limiting factors of the blood in the human body. So number one, there's a limited amount of blood. So there's not really enough blood in the circulatory system to take care of all activities functioning simultaneously at the same time. So for example, after eating, a large proportion of your blood goes to your stomach and your digestive tract to aid digestion. That's why it's called rest and digest. And that is why you don't want to go swimming until at least half an hour after you have eaten, so that it doesn't cause muscle cramping. as a byproduct of having that blood somewhere else rather than the large muscle groups. There's also about 25% of your blood volume always found in your lungs as a part of the gas exchange process. The other thing is that the blood has a tendency to pool or congest in areas that are damaged. So, for example, atherosclerosis. So you have areas where the blood isn't able to move through fast as it normally does, or in areas of infection. If you have an infection in one place or another, blood can tend to pool there. So the blood slows, it's less nourishing, both in nutrients as well as in oxygen, and doesn't carry the wastes away as efficiently or effectively. So it needs greater blood flow. So hydrotherapy can be used to accelerate that. It loosens congested blood flow, kind of breaks it up and helps it to start moving again. It speeds it up and equalizes blood flow around the body. And basically it helps it make a complete round through the body more efficiently and rapidly, and do a better job of cleansing and nourishing the various tissues and cells of the body. So rapidly moving blood also stimulates blood formation in the bone marrow. So basically stimulates erythropoiesis. Erythro is the red blood cells, poiesis is the regeneration or creating of new red blood cells. So the movement of the blood, so doing activity or having that blood move through your body at a more rapid pace accelerates the blood formation process. And that's a good thing. So some benefits of water as a therapy. It's very abundant. It's typically fairly accessible, especially in the Western world. There are some places in the world where water is a very high premium just because of its scarcity, but it's a natural resource. It has a high heat and cold capacity, and it cleanses better than all things. And sometimes it's referred to as the universal or a universal solvent. So it's a very good cleanser. We're made up of 65 to 70% water ourselves. So some principles that come into play with hydrotherapy, just as a foundation and background to the actual modalities that are used, and we'll get into those in upcoming segments here. But the first principle is that the temperature of the water produces the action. So the heat and the cold of the water, the heat's going to cause vasodilation, so the blood's going to move more quickly to the surface. The cold is going to cause a vasoconstriction and cause the blood to move again back to the core of the body. So moving it back and forth and changing that is what produces the benefits of the hydrotherapy. You can measure the heat with a thermometer versus just relying on the hand. There are some specific types of therapies that are temperature dependent. So you want to have a good thermometer available for measuring that. So basically, the temperature is the average energy that is in the substance in the water in this example. So you want to be able to measure that clearly and efficiently. Water is able to absorb a lot of energy, most other substances. It can add to or take up heat. So, for example, if someone has a fever, they can put a cold cloth on their head, and that's going to absorb a large amount of heat. It's a term called high specific heat, and the specific heat of a substance is the amount of energy that needs to be inputted into that substance to raise that substance 1 degree Celsius. So however much energy. And so water itself actually takes a lot of energy input to move it 1 degree in temperature and Celsius. So that's important to know. So it has great latent effects. So ice has greater cooling than ice alone. So ice has greater cooling than ice over time. So actually has a deeper effect that is long term. And steam is very much hotter than just boiling water. So you want to take caution to keep from burning. So just remember the latent effects of both the cold and the hot end of the spectrum of water. Next, it must be in contact with the body for a duration before its therapeutic qualities are provided. This is known as thermic impression. So if you have a short duration exposure, that can be providing quite a powerful effect. But it needs to have that direct contact for a period of time, whether it's a short period of time or a longer period of time. And we'll look at some of the effects of long versus short duration of application. That's why it's typically used in combination of hot and cold, although it can be used just hot or just cold. So friction, interestingly enough, is a synergistic effect. So you can use something called the cold mitten friction. Combined with cold, it has a greater effect of stimulating the body than just cold or just friction. So that's what we have when we have synergy, when the sum is greater than the individual parts added together. So this is also true for sprayed water or pail pours. So using a pail of water to pour it over a person. The percussive effect of water on the skin is similar to that of the friction motions or action of the cold mitten friction. So we mentioned already it's water's powerful solvent properties. It's the best cleanser that removes wastes. It holds nutrients. And the one thing that about it holding nutrients is key and important for why people need to be adequately hydrated. Much of the world is chronically dehydrated, not having enough water on a daily basis. The average amount of water that should be taken in by a person is easily calculated, especially if they have good, strong kidney function, take their body weight. So, for example, 180 pounds, and then divide that in two, you would have 90 pounds. And then instead of calling it pounds, you just call it ounces. And so 90 ounces of water per day for that individual who weighs 180 pounds is a basic level of water intake that one should utilize. Another way to measure that too is just looking at the clarity of your urine. If it's nice and clear, then you're getting enough hydration. You're going to notice some darkness to it, especially if you have just taken some vitamins and things like that. Then that's going to show up in your urine a little bit later. So just be aware of some of those factors that could affect the clarity of your urine. So cold can be utilized for extended periods, and it has a depressive effect. Actually, it tends to slow body function. It's a fact that's well known and used in surgical suites on a regular basis now to buy time on the operating table because it just decreases all metabolic functions. Respiration and pulse decrease, circulation slows, sense of touch is less acute, muscles are less able to work, and digestion slows or stops, which is good. So basically, in a surgical situation, basically just buys time, and there's less metabolic activity, so there's less metabolic waste or need for oxygen, for example. So someone can be without oxygen for a period of time in a cold environment. In fact, there's something known as the diving reflex, where someone who dunks their head under ice water, just dunks their face in ice water for that matter, it immediately depresses their heart rate. We used to do this as a lab in general biology, and when I was a TA, we'd have the lab students dunk their heads into a dishpan of ice water, and they would be measuring their heart rate before and after they did that, and notice the immediate depressive effects on various physiological parameters. So typically in hydrotherapy, long cold is not used, except in the case of fever. In a case of fever that's excessively high, that prolonged cold can help to mitigate the effects of a fever. So moderate heat in hydrotherapy, it helps stimulate physiology. So it helps to bring things up. In fact, any reaction that has heat added to it becomes more active. In fact, in some systems and in all living systems, there are enzymes which help to lower the heat of activation. There are animals like reptiles, for example, and other poikilotherms. Poikilotherms are those who take on the temperature of their surroundings, and their physiology increases, their metabolic rate increases with the temperature of the surroundings. So, for example, a snake in the desert in the early morning is going to be pretty sluggish because it's cold in the desert in the morning. But as the day warms up and gets hot, that snake can move really, really fast because all its metabolic properties speed up correspondingly with the temperature of the air. So moderate heat quickens circulation, increases the pulse, promotes digestion and breathing. Muscles and skin are more active, and it's an often used element or modality in hydrotherapy. A brief cold, so this would be like a quench, like a 30-second quench or less. It's a dramatic and powerful effect. It's used extensively as well. So we're using moderate heat and brief cold, and it's a reaction to, again, that thermic impression. The brief cold causes a profound response or recognition of something that's happening by the body. So it senses the depressive effects, a rapid, forceful heart rate, rapid circulation, the nerves begin to tingle and come alive, and respiration quickens, then slows, and muscles re-energize. So that brief cold is a beneficial property. So prolonged heat depresses body function. So that's why heat is only used in short relative time periods. It concludes therapy with a cold quench that helps to strengthen the body and equalizes circulation. So you use the heat, but then you quench it off with the cold. And that's going to move the blood rather than just leaving it wide open and static. So when using brief cold, you want to watch for an intense reaction in the patient. So the way things that you would see, you see the reddening of the skin. So that's going to be seen as the blood comes to the surface of the skin as it's responding to it. The nerve tingling sensation. So do the hot and colds in cycles in sets of 3 of hot and cold. So for example, a contrast shower, you're going to do hot, cold, and then hot, cold, hot, and then cold, and then you're done. You can do it again, but you need to maybe wait an hour or so before you would do it again. Otherwise, you don't get the maximum benefit. One way that you could increase the benefit is by adding friction. So either percussion, by having water hitting the body, or through friction. They're synergistic in that they enhance the effect. Typically, the cold needs to be colder and the warm needs to be warmer as you move through a series of sets of 3. But that's the gold standard is only in sets of 3. So sometimes a suppression reaction is best. So if anybody's ever had like a wounded knee that has some swelling associated with it, an ice bag is a great way to minimize or mitigate the swelling. That's hydrotherapy. You're using ice. Reduces inflammation. So a cold cloth, a pack, or ice bag. And that sustained use helps to suppress the inflammatory response. So that's instead of a heightening or enhancing of blood flow effect, that can decrease that swelling in that particular area. Later, it may be beneficial to do a contrast application to move the blood through, but in an acute situation, the ice is probably a better way to go to begin with to suppress the inflammation. So to review this portion, you can go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com, and we'll look for additional points as we look at the principles of hydrotherapy and then move into some different modalities of use of hydrotherapy.